Morning, Sec2. I hope you're all doing well. So today, guys, we're going to continue talking about heritage cities, specifically Quebec City. And we're going to actually finish talking about Chapter 1, which is just specifically Quebec City. And then I'm going to give you guys some time to work on your heritage walking tour of Quebec City. So your walking tour, you guys had started at last class. You did your planning page, so you know exactly what sites you're going to be seeing on your tour of Quebec City. So I'm going to give you guys some time after this to work on it. So basically, just to recap a little bit what we spoke about heritage cities. And basically, heritage cities, they're known for their cultural or historical aspects. It's a landmark which has been officially recognized by the United Nations, specifically by UNESCO, for, having some sort of cultural, historic, scientific importance to the world, right? So basically, sites are chosen based on having cultural, historic, scientific, or some other form of significance. They're legally protected. UNESCO regards these sites as being important for the collective interest of humanity. So specifically Quebec City, which is Chapter 1, which we spoke about last week. We talked about how the ramparts and citadels and Old Quebec or Vieux Quebec specifically are what make Quebec City a heritage city, something worth protecting. And it is unique because it has maintained its ramparts and citadels, as we discussed. So we saw the map of Quebec and we see here in purple the citadel, and surrounded by all of Old Quebec is the ramparts, keeping it safe, that they maintained. So we did also see some photographs. And we're just going to continue talking about this today and finishing up with this chapter. And then, like I said, after this, you guys will be working on your heritage walking tour, which you started planning last class. You can see the assignment. I strongly recommend you review the assignment since it's been over a week since you've seen it. But, so let's continue talking about Quebec specifically and some of the issues that go along with being a heritage city. So, firstly, why is Quebec a heritage city? So, it does have, like I said, historical importance. It was, historically important for its part in the war. But there's a little bit more to that. So here, Samuel de Champlain founded Quebec City in 1608. A little history for you. He built his first house at the foot of the Cap Diamant, which is currently Place Royale if you've ever been to Quebec City. At that time, indigenous people visited the area to trade furs. Because of its historic importance, this site is now recognized as a heritage site. About half of its buildings were built before 1850, and some date back to the days of New France. So half of the buildings are extremely old, and the other half just look very old because Quebec City is trying to maintain that aspect of it. The ramparts and the citadel, these are reminders of Quebec's military history. The ramparts were actually built in 1745 to defend the city and to strengthen the fortifications that existed since the 17th century. So they were built a very long time ago, and like we said, it was a wall of defense. You didn't have those openings for cars to go through because you didn't have cars then. They built those in later to adapt to the needs of the city and to the transportation needs. Conservation or modernization. The first contribution to the discussion of a historical district in Canada was led by Lord Dufferin. Lord Dufferin encouraged the government to keep the ramparts and enlarged the gates to allow easy access for cars and trucks. So even though we're trying to conserve the city, the question was whether Quebec City wanted to modernize like the rest of the world or to maintain its cultural and historical aspects. So by doing this, he helped to conserve the heritage of the city while making it functional in the modern world. So here there's a video, basically taking you on a little tour of Quebec City. I suggest you watch it. I won't play it, but please watch it. Oh, no. So some facts and figures here about Quebec City. So there are about 5,000 inhabitants of Old Quebec. It's not a big city. Quebec City itself is a lot bigger, but we're talking specifically about Vieux Quebec. These people maintain the neighborhoods, support the local businesses that are set up in the walled city outside the tourist season. So if you think about it, most of that city is just tourists, right? So these people, the people who live there, are responsible for maintaining that city even outside of the tourist seasons. The people who live in Old Quebec are generally better educated and older than those living outside of the city. But there are a lot of issues with living in this area. So for instance, the presence of tour buses and tourists. If you've ever been to Old Quebec in the summer, even in the winter, it's so beautiful and there are a lot of tourists. There are a lot of tour buses and a lot of tourists walking around. There is lack of parking. If you've ever tried to find a parking spot in Old Quebec, it is very difficult unless you go underground. Traffic. There is traffic, noise, and also not many amenities. You have to leave Old Quebec to get a lot of the services that we would get anywhere else. So many residents are actually opposed to the restoration and preservation of the area. Many people have moved away from the area due to the lack of services and also high rent. So to live there or to, open up a store there, the rent is a lot higher than outside of that city. Many also criticize the area for being a massive tourist attraction. We're talking about locals. And new buildings try to keep the same architecture so as to preserve the culture of the city. So new buildings being built or newer buildings or older buildings being restored, it is expensive to use the material that you have to use. You can't cheap out on the material because the city won't let you, because it's trying to maintain that heritage aspect. So there are territorial issues that go along with being a heritage city, not just Quebec, but around the world. So the first issue is preserving cultural heritage in a modern city. So making sure that your city is modern, but maintaining that heritage aspect. So the question that we're going to ask ourselves, and that hopefully we'll be able to answer by the end of the unit, does preserving cultural heritage interfere with the city's development? So you can think about that a little bit. Also, living with the specific features of a heritage city. So how can the needs of Quebec City residents and tourists be met while respecting the specific features of a heritage city? So let's find out. So issue number 1, again, preserving the heritage. So in order to maintain the city, both the federal and the provincial governments contribute to the upkeep. So the city itself is responsible for zoning and regional development, and there are restrictions imposed on the city in order to maintain the heritage. So for instance, public spaces, the limiting building heights to ensure that they don't block the sunlight from other areas. So for example, if you're building a new building in Quebec City, you'll have height limits. So you can't build too high to not block the sun. Urban greenery. So you're not allowed to cut down trees, but if they must be cut down for whatever reason, they need to be replaced. And walls and roofs. So the materials used to build must be compatible with local architecture, i.e. stone or brick, and they must respect the shape of the roofs as well. So again, even though these bricks and materials are very old, they're very expensive. So if you live there, if you work there, if you own a shop there, you have to maintain all the same materials. Personal homes in Old Quebec. In order to make changes or renovate a person's house, they must get permission from the government. So imagine you want to do reservations on your own house and you have to ask the government for permission. Some houses maintain the old style decor and eventually become living museums. There's also such a thing called the Cultural Property Act, which you need to know. And this basically places more restrictions on homeowners. In addition to maintaining the exterior, for some homes that are culturally and historically important, or if they've kept that culture to them and that like old school house, then the Cultural Property Act imposes that you also keep the original interior features in some cases, like fireplaces, beams in a house, walls, etc. It could be anything that they deem to be important to the city's heritage or history. So this is a huge problem for some residents of Old Quebec who want to, kind of modernize their homes or try to, do something new and exciting. In some cases they can't, or they have to get permission to do so. The second issue, which is the specific features of a heritage city. So 80% of traffic every day is due to 20,000 commuters who work or go to school in Old Quebec. Every year, over 4 million tourists visit Old Quebec. So, for instance, that's over 800 tourists to every resident. So that's a lot of tourists. During the summer months, there are 300 tour buses daily in and out of Old Quebec. During the winter months, Old Quebec's topography and snowstorms create traffic flow problems. The ramparts that surround the city limit the number of access points for cars. So the topography meaning the way that the city was built, the way that the roads were built, and of course the ramparts, don't allow easy access into and out of the city. What are some solutions to transportation problems? So some solutions that the city came to were tour buses are prohibited from parking anywhere within Old Quebec's walled city. So tour buses have to drop the people on the bus off, the tourists, and then go and park somewhere else. Buses have specific areas where they can stop also. They can't just stop anywhere. And Quebec has transformed certain stretches of roads into pedestrian zones only. So there are no cars allowed at all in certain areas to keep the walking flow going. For the future, the city plans on doing a couple of other things. So they intend on creating eco-friendly minibuses and prohibiting large trucks from entering the city. Only between 7 and 11 a.m. would they have access to going into the city. So that would be a way of kind of alleviating traffic jams in Old Quebec. So that's it for today in terms of learning new things. What I'd like for you to do before you go on to working on your walking tour is I actually posted more questions for you guys to answer for your chapter 1 notes. So it's going to be on the same document that you opened last time, but of course I reposted it, so it's right at the top. And basically you're going to answer those questions using the slides that we just went through. It is slides slides 21 to 30 of the PowerPoints. That's all chapter 1. And you guys are actually going to use these questions. Next week, you're going to have your quiz on chapter 1, and it's going to be based on these questions. So we will be answering them. You will be answering them, and then I'm going to correct them, okay? So make sure to get those questions answered by the end of class. If you have time, you're going to work on your walking tour. If you don't have time to work on the walking tour today, I'm going to give you guys Friday's class to work on that, okay? So that's it for today. Have a good day.